Values are a foundational element of company culture, but too often they're created by CEOs, directors, or a senior leadership team and then enforced or pushed down onto other people. In this video, I'm going to share with you my exact workshop that I use with my clients and teams to support them in creating unique and authentic values that truly feel real to them and that can be integrated into the company culture. As a company culture coach, I've spent more than 7 years supporting an array of clients with their company culture. And one of those elements is always values. I've worked with startups wanting to establish their company values, and I've worked with bigger brands who have had legacy values, who've maybe had their values created 10 or so years ago, but are no longer relevant to the world or the people that sit within the company. So, I want to share with you my exact workshop, step by step, so that you can do this workshop with your team, in your business, or as a consultant going in to support clients. The one thing I will caveat with this workshop is that it will only get you to your first draft of values and behaviours, and I'll explain why later. But essentially what we're going to be doing throughout this is co-creating the values with your team or with a group of people, whether that's in a community, within a business. But this is what I use as a coach and something that you can use too, and that's why I'm sharing it with you. And if you don't want to watch this entire video, I do also have a downloadable ebook that goes through this workshop as well, which I've linked in the comments below. Before I dive into the step-by-step of the workshop, there are a few key elements that I want to explain of why I do things a certain way. And I'll also come back to this on and off throughout the workshop. But these are elements that will really help to frame the workshop and give you an understanding of why we're doing things this way. The first thing I really want to talk about is why values matter. Now, we've seen a lot in the media and in the press of how poorly companies can not live by their values. So it's very understandable to have some cynicism around company values, because too often they're just pretty words on the wall or on a website or even in your company handbook, but never actually felt and lived. And this is why I want to go through this workshop, because essentially what I want you to really embrace is that values should be a core part of evolving, developing your culture, and ensure that you're all working together towards that purpose in how you want to be together. I really love the quote by Tony Hsieh, the previous CEO of Zappos, who said that your values are not your values until they're tested. Until they're tested, they're just niceties that you think about yourself. I feel like that's a pretty powerful quote, because how often do we see values that are not lived, that are not integrated into the culture, but they're only used as a behavioural mechanism to rank people or to enforce certain behaviours. Ultimately, your values should be things that enable you to make better decisions and hold all of you accountable. So that is why values matter. It's a code of conduct that we're all agreeing to in how we want to be together on the journey towards our mission and vision. Before we dive into the workshop, another thing I really want to highlight here is the litmus test for your values, because it is very easy for us to create aspirational, ambiguous values that sound absolutely great but mean nothing. Sound familiar? We don't want to do that. So I always say it's important to distinguish between operational values and aspirational values. And the difference between these two is aspirational is something that you want to become. You know you're not quite there yet and you have some work to do. It's an aspiration that you have. And the operational values are things that are already happening, already exist within the experience of the culture. So I want you to be aware of aspirational and operational values, because what we don't want to do in this session is to create too many aspirational values that are a bit too much of a stretch. And this is where we see a lot of companies fall down. They create these very aspirational, ambitious statements that don't actually mean anything, and then they've got a lot more work to do to improve their company culture. So whenever I'm running this session, I will always explain to teams the difference between aspirational and operational values. One of my personal philosophies about the work that I do is around co-creation, that we should have as many voices heard in order to create something. And the reason for this is in two parts, especially when it comes to values. First of all, it's well established through much studies and much research that we have more psychological ownership when we are part of the creation of something. That is why things like IKEA furniture or home-baked goods feel more valuable to us than when we've just bought something off the shelf. So this has been studied very much by people like Dan Ariely at Harvard and many other psychologists who have said that when we put some effort into creating something, we hold it much closer to our hearts, which is why it's really important when we're co-creating these values that we try to get more people involved so that they feel like they have a sense of psychological ownership. The second part of why co-creation is so important is because we get diversity, we get collective wisdom and experience. If it's only the senior leadership team or just the director creating the values, they have only their frame of reference, their point of view. What we want to do is expand it and widen the frame of reference so that we really have a true understanding of what the culture is actually like for as many layers as possible and as many people, to ensure that when we're crafting these values, they feel authentic to all of these groups. Now on to the workshop requirements. These are just the basic requirements to make sure you can facilitate a good session. So the first thing is that this workshop that I have designed is for only 5 to 30 people. I haven't made this for hundreds of people because that gets a lot more complex. So really have that in mind, that this workshop only really works with 5 people or a maximum of 30. The other thing I really invite you to do is to take this workshop somewhere fun, where we can get out of our day-to-day mindset, because when we're in the same workplace over and over again, we're just cognitively wired to think and behave in the same way. So I want to encourage you and invite you to go and find a fun space outside of the traditional workplace so that you can enjoy and have some fun with this workshop. And the last thing to consider is time. This workshop has been developed to be around 4 hours long. You could split it up into 2 parts, but I'm gonna let you decide how you do that. So let's dive into this workshop step by step. So the first thing I always do in any workshop or any session that I'm delivering is a check-in. A check-in question is a wonderful way to help people land in the space, arrive, gain participation straight away, because everyone has to answer the check-in question, and just helps to also create the energy that you want for that particular session or workshop. A lot of people will say to me that they find icebreakers or check-ins a little bit awkward or cringy, and that they tend to avoid doing these. And what I would say to you is, don't underestimate the power of a good check-in. It really does set the tone of the session. It helps everybody arrive. And what we're doing in that one small moment is gaining participation and making everybody aware that their voices are going to be heard during the session. And we really want to create an inclusive space. So I would encourage you to find check-ins that you feel will land with the team, something that isn't cringy or isn't awkward. And there are so many resources out there now. So I've listed those in the description below this video. The first place I always dive into with a value session is personal values. because often we can have a misunderstanding of what values are and how they motivate us to make certain decisions or choices in our lives. So the first place I start with any team or any group is to help them connect to their personal values. What are their 3 core personal values that they feel have shaped their lives, shaped their decision making, shaped their actions and behaviours and choices? And this is really a moment for every individual to reflect and to have a think about what are the 3 core values that are really important to me. So I will ask everybody in the room to consider what their personal values are and just to write them down somewhere, either in a journal or on some index cards or on some sticky notes. But this is just for them to really reflect on, what are my personal values and where have they shown up in my life? This leads me on to the second activity for this workshop, which I call Campfire storytelling. And this is where I will invite members of the group to share a time with their personal value, how that manifested into a situation or a choice or a decision. I really want them to come into that space and be able to share a personal story about how they've lived that particular value. And I always really love this part of the session because it also helps to create a sense of connection between team members. I've heard so many enlightening, funny, warm stories, profound, life-changing stories, all because people are connecting to their values and realizing how they are integrating them in their daily lives, sometimes without even really realizing. So the campfire storytelling is a wonderful activity, and it's simply to encourage everyone in the room to just share a short story for 3 minutes maximum of where that particular value has come from. Is it a situation, a decision they had to make, a choice, an experience, just something that they can tell the story to the rest of the group? The next activity is called Guess the Values. And what I do here is lay out situational cards so that the team can identify and consider what values might be driving or motivating the actions and behaviours in this situation. Again, it's another chance for us to connect to how our values can motivate our actions and behaviours. So, like I said, I have listed some of these situational experiences within the ebook that I've written for this particular workshop. But there are so many ways you can discover these. You can collect them from real life situations as well as fictional ones. So the ones I tend to use are fictional, although I'll gather some real life experiences as well. But all the team have to do here is read the situational cards and discuss in breakout groups what the values might be here that are driving this particular behaviour or actions. Now that we've done some context setting in terms of connecting to values and understanding how they influence behaviours and actions and attitudes, what we want to do is now start diving into the creation of the company values. The first place I go to before we begin is connecting to people's needs around the values. So what I like to do is ask people, when it comes to values, what do you particularly need these values to do for you? When we think about the context of work or how you want to feel connected to them, what needs do you have? And this is a small practice that I've taken from Convergent Decision Making by Mickey Cashtan, where we like to collect people's needs before we converge on a decision. But here, what I'm using it for is to really understand and make everybody aware of the needs that are in the room when it comes to creating these values. For example, it might be that an individual really doesn't want them to be full of jargon. So their need might be, I would like them to be in common sense language. I'd like them to be very clear and specific. So the need there is not for us to be ambiguous with our language. We also want to look at maybe if there's any particular agenda in the room. So do we need to also interpret these values to board members or other stakeholders? So do we have a need there as well? Will we be able to explicitly make them approachable to other stakeholders? So what I'm doing here is really making sure that everybody is aware of what needs are in the room, and as a larger business, as a larger company, what needs are present, so that we can make sure when we're crafting these values, they also connect and integrate the needs of the business and also of the team. Once we've listed all of the needs and put them on a whiteboard so that everybody can see explicitly what they are and ask any questions, we're now going to move on to another fun activity. This next activity is yet again another way for us to context set in regards to values, and it includes a little bit of role play, but don't worry, it's not too icky or awkward. Essentially what we're doing here is some values role play. So what I will do here is split the group out into smaller groups, so usually into kind of 2 or 3s, depending on the size, or 4 or 5. So we want to have micro groups set up. They get to choose a fictional company name and a fictional product, and then they have to choose a value, just one value in their microgroup, and it doesn't have to be related to their existing company. Remember, this is all fictional, this is all a role play. So they will then pick a fictional company, fictional product, service, whatever, and then a fictional value for this company. And then I will give them a situation. So it could be, for example, that we need to make a choice between a client deadline and an employee who said that they're burned out and can't meet that deadline. What do we do about this situation? So again, I'll give them more situational context, and they have to role play in front of the other groups this situation and navigate this decision with the value that they've chosen. Once all of the role plays have been done, every team has to try and guess what values were motivating the team decision towards that situation. So again, it's just another little bit of fun role play that really helps to land it in context and help the team identify of real life experiences when these values should also be integrated. At last, it's time to co-create some values. You've probably been waiting for this moment for a while, but trust me, it's really important to connect and observe and really learn in this process why these values are so important, so that we're not just creating random words out of thin air, and we are taking that time to really think authentically, how will these play out in our company? So let's go into values creation. For this particular activity, I like to use the liberating structure of 1, 2, 4, all. I find this really helps us to filter through the values that we want to create. So first of all, as per the 1, 2, 4, all structure, I will get individuals to consider what 3 values do they see for the company culture. What are the 3 values as an individual that they see for the company culture? And while this is happening, I'll maybe put on some ambient music just to set a reflective mood, because what we don't want is people kind of already talking. We really want to set a moment of individual reflection only. So as individuals, pick 3 core values for the company culture. Then I'll then get them to pair up with someone else, and again 5 minutes of sharing which values they both came up with, and are there any similarities or stark differences. And then again it happens into a group of 4 where 2 become 4, and they also again share the values that they've come up with, filter, are there any stark differences, and then finally we share as a much wider group, and we start to see where are some of the similarities and where are some of the contrasting differences, if there are any. So at this point we should have collected all the sticky notes from people, put them on the whiteboard and collected them so that we can really see any themes that are emerging within the values. Now at this point, what organically starts to happen is that we start to see the themes emerge of the values. So there's normally, what I try to get teams to work towards is only 3 to 5 core values, but sometimes there might be 6. There's often just 1 added in. But for example, let's say we've got some key themes going on here, but an individual feels particularly passionate about 1 core value. What I would ask them to do is propose it to the group, to be able to tell a story or why this particular value is really important to the company or to them personally. And what I want them to do is to be able to present it and the team to decide whether that should be on the board and should be thought about, even if it's not part of any of the common themes or patterns. So this really helps us when there is a particular value that we do feel extremely passionate about and we want to see on the board. Now at this point, we should have 3 to 5 core values or themes emerging that are going to be crafted into values. And what we want to do now is really understand the behaviours that sit within these values. So what are the attitudes, actions, or behaviours, the specific things that we would expect from someone living these values? Now, again, one of my favourite ways to do this is the liberating structure of TRIZ. And I use it a little bit differently. So I call this creative destruction, because sometimes it's easier for us to think about what we don't want in order for us to think about what we do want. So what I ask them to begin with is I kind of put the values to one side and say, let's just forget about these for a moment. What I want you to do is imagine the worst possible version of your company. What would that look like? How would people be behaving? How would people be acting? And this is a really fun moment for teams to think, gosh, if we were the worst possible version of ourselves, what would that look like? And they put down lots of different situations or things that might be happening, like not communicating well to customers, not communicating well internally. We talk about lots of situations where this just is like the worst company imaginable, basically. And it's a fun activity to help people think outside of the box. Once that's done, and I give the teams a few moments, again, I will break them out into micro groups. I will then ask them, okay, with this in mind, with this worst possible version, if we were to come back to these values, what does this look like in the context of your company? What behaviors or expectations are you requiring of each other? And that just helps us to really filter what is important to us when it comes to the values, the behaviors that sit below the values. This is the moment where you essentially have this first draft, this essence, and this is the only place we are going to get to. What I recommend you do now after this workshop is bring together and decide who is going to finalize these values, who is going to craft them, wordsmith them into the language of your company, of the brand, because we have the essence here. There's really not much to change. We just need them wordsmithed and branded to the company. So this is why I say the place you will get to is your first draft, because otherwise we're going to spend too much time wordsmithing, taking long, like making sure we've got the right words and the right context. What we really want to do is make sure that we have this first draft, this essence of values and behaviors. This might feel difficult for people to accept that they're not going to have the final draft in this session. So explain the process to them, not only at the start of the session, but also throughout the session. We just want to get to a first draft where we have the essence of the values and the essence of the behaviors. As with any workshop, I will always do a checkout question as well, because this will just help people leave the session, leave whatever's been discussed or thought about, help them to stop in this session and move on to whatever they're going to do next. And it's also a great moment, again, of connection with the rest of the team. So I will ask a check-in question about maybe what are you leaving with today, just to help people step out of the workshop and continue with what they're going to do. Now, as I mentioned, this workshop doesn't get you to the complete final product of values and behaviours. It's really down to you deciding and choosing key people who are really good at being able to explicitly and make it clear what these values and behaviours are now. And the one thing I would say is, if you have a small team doing this, so let's say we've used 30 people to co-create the values and behaviours, but now we've only got maybe 3 key members who are going to be finalising these values and behaviours. The one thing I want you to make sure you do is connect back to the needs that we talked about in the workshop. So what are the needs that were expressed in that workshop that we need to make sure are then integrated into this final version? For example, the making sure we don't use jargon or ambiguous language. Are these going to be able to be communicated to our other stakeholders? Things like that. So although you might then refine it down with 3 individuals just crafting the wording around these things, what we really want to make sure is, if you do that, that you do connect back to the needs that have been expressed within that group as well. So that was my full values workshop that I facilitate with teams and businesses to help them create authentic and unique company values. Now, like I say, this isn't just one way of doing it. There are so many ways that you can co-create your values together. This is just the way that I prefer and I have seen work really effectively with teams, especially when we want more people to be involved and to really make us feel like we have some authenticity. I haven't also discussed in this video about integrating all of these values into the company culture, because once you have them, then what do you do with them? Am I right? So I'm going to cover that in another video. So if you're not subscribed already, do hit subscribe and then you'll be notified of when I put that video up as well. But I hope that this workshop takes you further on the journey for values, and I would love to hear if you've used any elements of these with teams yourself, or if there was a particular part of it that really resonated with you. But thank you so much for watching, and have fun crafting your values.